Thank you for joining me today here to talk about game development in the cloud using Parsec. My name is Vince Auletta, and I'm the Director of Solutions here at Parsec. And I'm happy to be here in person with you all today, given this presentation. I'm going to keep it pretty high levels. There's not going to be a lot of, kind of in the weeds technical information here today. But if you have any technical questions, there will be some time for Q&A at the end, or feel free to come grab me after the presentation, and I'm happy to get as in the weeds as any of you would like. A brief agenda for us here today. We'll talk a little bit about who Parsec is and where we came from. We'll talk about Parsec for Teams, which is our enterprise product for businesses. We'll talk about the game development use cases that we've supported today, about our cloud partnerships. We'll talk a little bit about a case study around Ubisoft Forward, which is an event conducted by Ubisoft. And then I'll give a very, very brief high-level demo of Parsec. And then, like I mentioned, we'll leave a little bit of time here at the end for a Q&A. So, Parsec was founded back in 2016 with a simple goal, which was to allow you to use your gaming computer from anywhere. We didn't really have what we call a revenue model at the time. We just wanted people to use our software. And between 2016 and 2020, just prior to the pandemic, we grew our user base to about 4 million users. Again, these are free consumers just using the product because it worked well. And then something happened in early 2020 called COVID, and things changed. And it turns out that some of those users who were using our free consumer product worked at companies like EA and Ubisoft. And they came to us and they said, hey, we really love your software. It works extremely well. But in order for us to use it for work, we need you guys to add some features, right? Some, single sign-on integration, for example, and a few other, power user type features that we didn't have in the product because at the time we weren't selling to businesses. So we very quickly pivoted in early 2020 and built what we have today as Parsec for Teams and Parsec for Teams Enterprise, which is a business-focused version of the consumer application that we'd been developing for the previous 4 years. We like to say that we started with the hardest problem first, being remote gaming. And because we successfully tackled that hardest problem, it was relatively easy for us to pivot to other use cases like visual effects, animation, and architecture, engineering, and construction type use cases. So while you see up here a lot of really, really awesome gaming logos that we're super proud of, there are quite a few other large organizations that use Parsec for Business that we just don't have clearance to use their logos. And then fast forward today, we have about 10 or 11 million users on that consumer application, up from 4 million users back in 2020. And we have tens of thousands, nearing 100,000 users on our Teams and Enterprise applications. So we've been very fortunate in that the pandemic was good for us and our business. I'm not going to read this whole slide to you all, but there are 3 takeaways here. It's kind of a new world post-pandemic. People want to be able to work from anywhere. People expect the tools to work seamlessly no matter where they are. And people need smarter infrastructure because of things like GPU shortages. One of my favorite examples of people wanting to work from anywhere, I actually have 3 cool examples for you. One of those is connecting from Germany to Seattle to do marketing, like to play test a game for marketing purposes. Another was to do animation from Australia to Iceland, which is really, really far. It's pretty much all the way across the globe. And then lastly, we do have a few users that are using Parsec to do the quote-unquote van life, where they literally live out of their van, they travel all around the world or all around the continent that they're on. They use a 4G or a 5G hotspot, and they can literally work from anywhere using the Parsec technology. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Ubisoft Forward later in the presentation. This is a really cool quote from the director of international events at Ubisoft, talking about how they use Parsec to enable remote marketing events. And he says that what struck me was that they were giving feedback, they being the people that were playing the games remotely, so journalists and influencers that they gave early access to the game. They were giving feedback on the game in general, but not the streaming itself. This indicated that the streaming solution was completely erased to make room for play. So the experience was essentially the same, whether they were invited to Ubisoft's campus to play the game, or if they were able to stay at home and use their laptop to play the game. And that's the best feedback that we could hear, is that the product works so well, the streaming works so well, that it essentially disappears from the experience. So I talked a little bit about how we started as a consumer application, and then we pivoted into an enterprise application. And that enterprise application is called Parsec for Teams. And it gives you the ability to make sure everything you're doing is secure and in control by your enterprise admins. It gives you access to manage your computers centrally via our administration panel. It supports things like 444 color mode and virtual displays, which means that you don't need to have physical displays connected to your computers. You can have computers in the data center, you can have computers in the public cloud, and we support up to 3 displays, even if there are no physical displays connected. And then lastly, we support drawing tablets and Cintiq displays. So for those art and design type use cases where drawing tablets are really, really critical to those workflows, again, people give us the feedback that they don't know they're working remotely. Their drawing and the latency and the frame rate are so good that it feels like they're sitting in front of that computer while they're drawing, even though they're actually drawing on a computer that's somewhere else. We're really, really proud of this statistic here, which correlates pretty well to a 3-day work week. So you can see here that about 70% of work hours are spent in Parsec, and that comes out to about 8.2 hours per day. So if you think about a hybrid work model where someone spends 3 days at home and 2 days in the office, this data maps almost exactly to that. So for those 3 days that people are at home, they're spending just over 8 hours per day in Parsec, which means they're really spending their entire workday in Parsec, which means Parsec works to do everything they need to do. They don't need to jump in and out of different applications to do their workflows. They can get everything done inside Parsec. Now, when it comes to game development, we have solutions for every step of the game development process. We typically divide those into 4 sections. So the initial concepting and the core dev, right? So the engineers that are actually writing the code and developing the game. We also have solutions for art and design. So the people that are doing character models, the people that are designing levels, the people that are working with those Wacom tablets and care about color accuracy. We have many large customers that use us for audio as well as for the visual design aspects. So those are the first 2 pillars, engineering and development and art and design. And then once a game has kind of moved through those processes, they go into QA, right? So because Parsec was designed initially for gameplay, QA is one of our strongest use cases because it allows you to do QA remotely as if you were sitting there in front of the machine. And then lastly, once you're done with that QA, you're typically going to go into a user research and a marketing phase. And we have a special feature called Guest Access that powered that Ubisoft Forward event that is designed specifically for those user research and those marketing type events. So again, Parsec works for every stage of the game development process, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Diving a little bit more into those features that I mentioned, I'm not going to, again, read through the whole slide, but 444 color is critically important for those workflows where color accuracy matters. By default, video streaming technologies throw away about half of the color information. It's called chroma subsampling. If you go to YouTube and you watch a YouTube video, you won't know it, but all of the color information is not actually there. And they do that to make the compression better. With Parsec, you can disable that chroma subsampling, which means that the colors you see on your client device are an accurate representation of the colors on the other side. Like I mentioned earlier, we also support multiple monitors and Wacom tablets and Cintiq displays. We also support instant collaboration. So this is something that was missing after the pandemic, because imagine you're all in a studio environment. It's really, really easy to walk over to someone's desk, to look over their shoulder and provide feedback in real time. But when you start to work from home, you miss that capability. So Parsec makes it really, really easy to, quote unquote, virtually walk over to someone's desk and see their screen, provide feedback in real time, and you can optionally grant your collaborators control if that's something you want to do. And then lastly, in the bottom right over there, Guest Access is that feature that allows those user research and those marketing events to work really, really well. So I know this particular presentation is about the cloud. So we had to call out some of our cloud partners and our cloud solutions providers here. We are partnered with both Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure to make using Parsec in the cloud really, really easy. So if you go to the AWS Marketplace or the Azure Marketplace and you search Parsec, you're going to see some results that can get you spun up with the Parsec system in just a few clicks. And that's really powerful. We didn't have that earlier on in the pandemic, and we're pretty proud of the fact that it's much easier to use Parsec in the public cloud than it was in the past. But some companies don't want to go through that process themselves. They don't want to go to the marketplace and pick the AMI and install their software and configure the network and all that stuff. So we've partnered with a few companies, most notably Bebop Technology and Arch Platform Technologies. Arch Platform Technologies is actually in the AWS booth down on the show floor to make that process even easier. So if you know that you want to do game development in the cloud, but you don't want to spin up the technical expertise to do that, you can go talk to Bebop or talk to Arch Platform Technologies, and they will make setting up that entire cloud environment with storage, with networking, with workstations, all of that super, super easy for you. All right, moving on to Ubisoft Forward. This is our case study. Ubisoft Forward is an event that Ubisoft conducts one or more times a year for their community to playtest games prior to release. Back in 2020, we partnered with them to help them launch Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Watch Dogs Legion. And the important takeaway here is that members of the Ubisoft community were able to play test those two games without needing to install them on their computers. They connected to Ubisoft-controlled infrastructure either in the public cloud or in Ubisoft data centers, and they were able to play the games as if they had installed them on their machines, even though they had not installed them on their machines. This is a pretty important differentiator because for pre-release games, you really don't want things to leak. And one of the things that can happen when you install a game binary files, as they're called, on a local computer, is that those people can start to try to dig in and reverse engineer those files. So by not installing the game on the end user's device and instead streaming pixels over the internet, you remove a lot of the risk that's associated with installing pre-release IP on end user computers. It also is much quicker because they don't need to download a large game file and install it. The game's already pre-installed on the remote machine that they're connecting to using Parsec. And if we jump back to this quote here from Ubisoft's Director of International Events, again, what struck all of these 1,000 plus participants was that what struck them about the experience was that the streaming was removed from the situation, right? They didn't get any feedback, any complaints about, hey, I wasn't really able to play the game because I was streaming it and I didn't install it. No one complained about that, which indicated that the streaming solution was completely erased to make room for the actual experience, which was the play. All right, so with that, I'm gonna jump into a very, very quick demo here, and then we will leave some room for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to open the Parsec application here. I actually already have it open, and I'm going to drag it over here to this other monitor. Forgive me. It's a little, I have to turn this way now. So you'll see here that I have the ability to share this current computer. The share button indicates that I can share the current view of the machine that I'm on. So there's a machine under here. It's an Alienware desktop. And if I wanted to, I could click this blue share button. I can copy and paste this URL to any of my colleagues. And when they click this URL, I'm going to get a pop-up down here on the bottom of my Parsec application that says, your friend is attempting to connect. Do you want to accept or reject their connection? And if you accept their connection, they'll have view only. So going back to virtually walking over to someone's desk and looking over their shoulder. And then I can optionally grant them keyboard and mouse control if I want to give them the ability to take over my computer. So that's the ability to share out your local machine. But most of the time, people are going to use Parsec to connect to a remote computer rather than sharing their local machine. So I'm actually going to connect to this machine that's called Parcade, which is out in our booth on the show floor, and they're actually doing demos using this machine right now. So I'm not going to actually interact with it very much, but I am going to connect and show you kind of what's going on. So this is actually powering the SyncSketch booth down on the show floor. SyncSketch is one of our sister companies within the Unity family. And they're using Parsec to connect to my machine at my house in Southern California to demo SyncSketch, including drawing tablets and Cintiq displays. I will show you up here in the top left, you'll see the Parsec overlay button. And there are a few important features here in the overlay, one of which is the ability to stream with 444 color. The other is to add additional displays. So if I want to, I can stream display 2 and display 3. I can switch my resolution here in real time from anywhere from 4K all the way down to a very low resolution if I'd want to. And in real time here, I can configure my bandwidth cap. So Parsec is really, really friendly for pretty much any internet connection. It doesn't matter if you have a slow home internet connection that can only do 10 megabit, because you can set your cap in here to 10 megabit. Or maybe some of us have fiber at home, and it's a lot easier for us to go up here to the 30, 35 megabit range and get a little bit of a higher quality video. In any case, the takeaway here is Parsec is super, super easy to use and super fast, but still gives the end user a decent amount of control over their streaming experience. Before I jump off, I'll direct your attention up here to the top of the screen, which contains our latency information. The decode latency indicates how long it's taking this computer, the client device, to decode the video that's being sent to it. The encode latency indicates how long it's taking the remote computer to create the video stream that we're seeing. And then the network latency is how long it's taking us to talk to each other over the internet. And when you add all of these latencies together, that gives you your total latency for your Parsec stream. And generally, if you're in the same metropolitan area as the computer you're connecting to, like if you're connecting to a machine in the office or in the public cloud that's in a local region to you, your network latency will be much lower than this. And then if you add all three of those together, that's your total delay. What's really cool about Parsec is these encode and these decode processes are typically less than 10 milliseconds, which means there's less than 1 frame of delay in your typical Parsec experience. Lastly, up here, you can see that I'm using the NVIDIA decoder. So Parsec is always hardware accelerated whenever we can be. I'm currently streaming with 420, but I could enable 444 color if I wanted to. Then you can see my resolution and the fact that we're using full range video encoding. So that is the Parsec desktop application. We also have what's known as the administration panel or the admin panel, which is where you can control who has access to what. I'm not going to demo that here live because it is a little bit too much to demo in a situation like this. But if we jump back to this slide, this is a kind of cutoff view of our admin panel. Let me go over here. This is a cutoff view of our admin panel. So you can see here, this is actually the guest access menu, and it shows how Ubisoft used Parsec to enable those guest access events. So each of these access links is an invitation for a remote user to access a machine for a limited period of time. Inside the admin panel, we also have the ability to manage users, manage groups. We have audit logs. We have single sign-on integration. Pretty much everything that an enterprise is looking for to integrate Parsec into their environment, it's configured here via the admin panel. All right, jumping back, I think we covered everything. Yeah. All right. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer? You, sir. You raised your hand first. Oh, Julian's got a microphone.
Just 1 second.
All right.
How do you handle the trade-offs of latency versus quality for the different use cases of devs who might want to see, the most accurate color representation versus users who might, accept higher, more compression artifacts at lower latency?
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you. So by default, Parsec prioritizes frame rate over video quality. And that's not to say that you won't get an excellent result for both of those things. But when the internet starts to struggle, when we start to see things like packet loss, we have to make a decision. Do we start to drop frames and create stutter while keeping the quality a little bit higher? Or do we drop the quality and keep the experience smooth for the end user? And generally, the default choice that we make is to keep the experience smooth for the end user at the expense of quality, because typically you're going to notice stutter more than you notice a quality drop. However, there are a few settings within Parsec that allow you to kind of tell us, hey, we want you to prioritize quality a little bit more. So if I jump over here to my settings here, and then we go to client and scroll all the way down, you'll see down here, oh, sorry, it's cut off. I need to resize it for the for that other display. One sec. There we go. Now we got the bottom of the window. You'll see here 10-bit color experimental. I currently have it off, but if you enable this, it's going to increase latency a little bit. It's going to increase your bandwidth consumption a little bit, but it's going to give you more accurate color pretty much all the time. Also, if we jump back up here to the host side of things, and this would need to be configured on the remote computer, I'm just showing it here locally. If we scroll all the way down, you will see that we have a few other options for quality. So right here, the default quality option is lowest latency. But we can come in here and select balanced or highest quality to tell Parsec to do a little bit more to focus on quality rather than focusing on that low latency. Thank you for the question. Great question. One of you guys have a question as well? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so we came a bit late. So is this tool like a team collaboration tool?
It is, yeah. So Parsec can be used for both team collaboration as well as for that one-to-one remote workstation access. So if I jump back to my computers tab over here, remember I was connecting to this remote machine, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to show it right here. So on this remote machine, if I were connected and I opened the Parsec application, I would have this same blue share button. And if I click the blue share button, it's going to give me a URL that I can copy and paste to other members of my team. And when they click this URL, they'll attempt to connect to my machine. They won't automatically connect. I'll receive a pop-up down here that says, do you want to accept or reject your colleague's connection? If you accept that connection, they will join your computer. They'll be able to see your screen for collaboration purposes, but they won't be able to interact. And then optionally, you can grant them keyboard and mouse control so that they can interact if you want them to.
Okay, and so is this like Unity's first software, which is like for the general public? Like, is nothing related to the Unity engine?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's the Unity's first software that's available for the general public, but it definitely is one of them. So we were acquired about a year ago by Unity, and we're essentially treated as kind of an independent subsidiary.
Oh, you were acquired by Unity.
We were acquired by Unity.
It's like your presentation under Unity.
Exactly, exactly, yeah.
Okay,
So Parsec is owned by Unity, but it is a separate product. It's not included with your Unity license. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Any other questions?
Have you had any experience with the distance between the host and the server? Like, how far can you go?
Yeah.
And at what point does it, if at all, break down?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, I have to give you kind of the typical IT answer, which is it depends, right? And it depends on a lot of things. But the biggest thing that it depends on is the use case. So for example, if you're playing let's take gaming. So if you're playing a platform game, you know, where you really have to time your jumps, and that's pretty much the only timing thing that you need to do, oftentimes your brain is able to kind of compensate for the latency, and you can play a game like a platformer with really high latency and still have pretty decent success. But if you compare that to something like a first-person Twitch shooter game, like Overwatch or Counter-Strike or something like that, your latency tolerance is going to be a lot lower because you're going to die a lot more, and you're going to move your mouse, and you're going to be able to detect that latency that you wouldn't otherwise detect with a different type of game. And that goes to use cases as well. So if you're drawing on a Wacom tablet, you're going to be a little bit more latency sensitive because maybe you'll draw and then the line will come behind a little bit later. But if you're working in, let's say you're working in Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve and you're editing a video, that's another example of a use case where the latency can kind of be compensated by you. So it really does depend. I mentioned a little bit earlier before you guys joined that we have some use cases, particularly for the user research and playtesting, that has gone across continents and across the globe. So we've had people connect from Germany to Seattle to do games playtesting. We've had people connect from Australia to Iceland to do animation. And then we have people who do like the van life thing where they just commute around wherever they are and they use a mobile hotspot to connect back to their workstation in the studio. So we typically say up to 100 milliseconds of latency, But there are other use cases where 100 to 200 works just fine. Cool. Thanks for the question.
Anybody else? All right, thanks.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.